Has the recording started?
Yes, Chair, I'm just waiting for it. It's pending.
Okay, let's quickly wait.
Okay, it started.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Welcome everyone today to the Finance, Economic Development and Tourism meeting. I apologize for being 4 minutes late. Members, we are going to be dealing today with the deliberations on the written and oral submissions received on the Western Cape 19th Gambling and Racing Amendment Bill B1 2020. We had a public hearing on this particular bill on the 9th of September 2020, where the committee heard a number of oral submissions from industry stakeholders and community members. And I've received apologies for today's meeting from the head of Provincial Treasury, Mr. Savage, as well as Member Makamba Bocha. Some house rules. I'm going to mute everyone at the beginning of the meeting, so I'm going to do that quickly. And this will be to avoid background noise. But colleagues, I please ask that you put your video or mic on if you would like to speak. You do not need to put your video on if you do not wish to do so, but just so that we're able to monitor that. And please just put your video and mic off afterwards once you're done presenting or speaking. We also have a raise the hand function. Please use the function if you would like to ask a question or pose a point of order. I just ask that you please lower your hand once you have concluded the respective engagement. Further, if there's any particular presentations that the respective officials please put those presentations on themselves, or alternatively, if they're struggling, then they can ask our procedural officer, Ms. Adams, to do so. I'm going to ask that the members introduce themselves, and then I will ask that the officials introduce themselves here today, and then I'll ask if there are any other guests in our meeting today. So members, please introduce yourselves.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, Chair. My apologies for the 2 minutes that I was late. Dalen Mitchell, and I'm a member of this committee.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chair. Andrikus van der Station, member of the committee.
Thank you. Member Nkondlo, are you with us? Member Nkondlo, I see you on the participation list on the side, but I can't hear you. Perhaps just try and unmuting yourself.
Okay, sorry, Chair. I'm Member Nkondlo, member of the committee. Apologies there.
No problem. And I did receive the apology from Honorable Makamba Bocha. Mr. Phillips, are you leading us today?
Yes, Chairperson. I'm actually on the provincial side. And my two colleagues, Claire Orton and Dr. Ndodana, can introduce themselves as well.
Good morning. My name is Ndodana Leya. I'm at Provincial Treasury.
Good afternoon, Claire Horton, Provincial Treasury.
I think Dr. Hartman is in the room also.
Yeah, good afternoon, Chair and members. Roy Haverman, DGG for Finance and Fiscal and Economic Services at the Treasury.
Thank you so much. I know we have legal officer from the WCPP also here today. If he could introduce himself.
Afternoon, members, and to the colleagues and guests. My name is Marstorp. I'm the legal advisor at Provincial Parliament. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Now I'm going to ask, are there any guests in our meeting today, if they could introduce themselves?
Thank you, Chair. It's Nick Altini, here to observe again for Sun International, and I'm my colleague Liana Engelbrecht is also in the meeting.
No problem. Thank you so much. Are there anyone else as a guest in our meeting today who would like to introduce themselves?
Good afternoon, Chair. It's Astrid Miller from Legal Services at the Western Cape Government.
No problem. Thank you so much. Anyone else?
Good afternoon, Chair.
background from Edward Nathan Sonnenberg's just observing.
No problem. Thank you. Welcome. Is there anyone else? Trying to just look here at the participant list. Okay, I think that might be everyone. Okay. So members, you have all received, and I'll put this up. Show. So 71 page document. And in the 71 page document that you received, it is all of the submissions that we've received. Members, you've also received all of the presentations and documents that we've received from stakeholders who did oral presentations. That's also by email, and it's obviously also uploaded. And we're going to then start with any questions that you may have, and the department is obviously here to also answer. And we will then work through this, and I will then take whichever hands come up first. Members, are there any hands? Any questions regarding the submissions we've received? Or would you like me to go through the names of the submissions and then you pose questions per the names of the submissions to the department? Honorable van der Westhuizen.
Thank you. Yes, thank you, Chair. Chair, perhaps if you could just assist us to ensure that we're all on the same page. Are we going to follow the numbering of the clauses in the bill, and therefore dealing with the clauses one by one, or how would you like us, so that we just make sure that we're all stay together, although we're not in the same room? I think therefore it's quite important that we know what would you like to deal with first. Thank you.
No problem. That is in order. If members are happy with it, I could start with the bill and then I can go through the clauses of the bill. And then if you have any questions regarding the submissions made regarding those particular clauses, you could pose that. That is the first option. The second option is that we go through the submission document, which is the 71 page document, and then members make questions on that document, as well as any of the presentations, obviously, to the department. So these questions would specifically be for the department clarity seeking or questions regarding how something might be implemented specifically. So those are essentially the two options. Honorable van der Westhuizen, do you prefer the clause option or do you prefer going through the submissions?
Thank you, Chair. I think to ensure that we deal with all the clauses and that we don't jump around, I would propose that we take the bill as our principal document and then work through the bill clause by clause, but then obviously where clauses have been commented on or where there have been input, that we would then refer to the matrix that was so kindly provided to us.
No problem. Members, are we all happy with that? Going once, going twice? Okay. Okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my video off, but I'm going to ask our procedural officer, either Ms. Adams or Ms. Kluter, if we can just put the bill up and then we start at the first page and then we can work through that. And I know there are some submissions that don't specifically relate to the bill, but we can then deal with those after we've dealt with those clauses. So if we can just put the bill up for us. Perfect, thank you. We can go down. So that is just the notice in the Gazette. Okay, let's start there. But before we start there, let's just go a little bit up, and so we can just explain how the bill is written. So colleagues, just a reminder that if the bolds are if it's in bold type in square brackets, then it indicates an omission from existing enactments. So it's taking it out. And if the words are underlined, it is putting it in. So it will be putting it into the act. Let's go down. Okay, so then obviously there's the objective of the bill. Are there anyone who would like to ask questions regarding the objective? I don't think the objective is too complicated. It's simply what the bill aims to do. If not, I will then go to the first clause and I'll read it out just in case. So the first clause reads, be it enacted by the Provincial Parliament of the Western Cape as follows. Amendment of Section 44 of Act 4 of 1996, and then it goes further to indicate which previous acts that section amended. And then it goes 1, Section 44. I think Provincial Treasury made a typo in line 1, putting a T after the word section. But anyway, Section 44 of the Western Cape Gambling and Racing Act 1996, Act 4 of 1996, the Principal Act is amended by the substitution of subsection 3 of the following subsection. Quote 3, the fees contemplated in subsections 1 and 2 shall be payable to the board. Okay, colleagues, I will take questions on the submissions that were made on this particular clause. Okay, I see Honourable van der Westhuizen's hand. Okay, Honourable Westhuizen, you may go ahead.
Thank you, Chair, and I do hope that you will allow me to not only stick to the submissions made, but also to personal questions that I may have. The motivation for paying these fees directly to the board has been that the board should become self-funded. Now, my question is just, and we've seen the finances of the board. We do know that currently, the board unfortunately has to be severely subsidized by the Provincial Treasury. So I don't differ with the aim, but I'm not sure how transferring the funding directly to the board will positively influence the financial position of the board. If people don't take ownership for their income in terms of whether it's channeled through Treasury or whether they receive it directly, for me the motivation should be just as strong to ensure that one's books balance. So I have a problem with that. We do know that in general in our country, whether it's a tax on plastic bags, it's not ring-fenced for plastic bags or for a levy, then that levy isn't ring-fenced just for road safety or for road construction. And therefore, I can't understand why, when the general principle in terms of public finances is to ensure that these kinds of levies are all pooled and then distributed by the relevant executives and parliaments in the best way it seems fit, why we would now be relinquishing or going against that principle, and how is it going to help the board? Because if we now say, okay, board, you must be self-funded, there are your levies, then we know that the gambling board will tomorrow have to close its doors. Its expenses just too far exceeds the income, and Treasury will in any case, for the foreseeable future, will have to fund the board through additional allocations from the provincial fiscus. So if somebody could just explain to me how this clause in itself will improve the functioning of the board, I'm all ears to hear that. Thank you, Chair.
No problem. Thank you for your questions. Are there any other questions from members on clause 1? If none, then I'll just add my question in regarding clause 1. I just would like to understand if the money is going to be given to the board directly, will it be ring-fenced for the board? And if the fees are going to be ring-fenced for the board, will it be 100% of the fees that will be ring-fenced? Will it be a portion? If it's a portion, how much of that portion will be ring-fenced? Is it the exact amount that will be ring-fenced in terms of operational fees? And if so, where will the rest of the money go that will not be ring-fenced? And will the rest of the money then continue to be used in a similar fashion as currently the province gets to decide what to do with the money? Thank you. Mr. Phillips, I'm going to allow you to direct from yourself or who else in terms of answering.
Yeah, sure. Chairperson, the funds actually that's appropriate on the board basically is made up of two elements currently. It is actually those actually that the board collects, and in this case actually the transfers from the provincial sphere to support the self-sustainability of the board. In the presentation that we've done actually to the committee 2 days ago, we highlighted basically that at some stage post 1997, policy determinations actually wanted the board to be self-sufficient. And based on that, there were certain fees prescribed that the board could collect that would actually make it self-sufficient, which included the operator fee as well as the exclusivity fees actually. Those two elements actually, with other fees actually that the board collects, has made the board at some stage actually to be non-reliant on any transfers from the fiscus to support its operations. Now the exclusivity fees actually were based on actually the location of casinos in different municipal jurisdictions across the province, as well as the LPM operator fees were aligned to the provision actually of operating the LPMs to two providers. So with the expiration of that fees, which currently actually would then actually be retained within the gambling industry, the board became more reliant actually on transfers from the provincial fiscus just to effect its operations. We then actually determined actually that to be able to effect that operations actually there was actually almost a shortfall, and on average of between 27 and 33 million actually from the provincial fiscus towards the board. The board is considered to be independent. However, there's quite a number of checks and balances actually both to protect the industry but also to the broader society and community at large. So the board's budget gets approved by the minister. Each and every element actually within the budget in its operations gets actually interrogated. The minister approves the budget actually, and on a quarterly basis actually the board reports in terms of spending to the provincial legislature against its income and its expenditure, its revenue and expenditure. And at the same time actually it's also actually accountable to provide an annual report which is tabled in the legislature. So the accountability for that regard is there. The idea is actually that the board is a regulator, and the idea was actually to have the board as independent actually from government or the industry in that regard. So the transfers and the ring fencing of funds actually, so the money that is will be collected through this particular piece of legislation will go directly to the board to defray its operational expenditure as has been in the past, to make the board actually self-sufficient, Chairperson. So in this case, actually, it's a portion of that the board collect in terms of actually to make it self-sufficient actually, and it's regulated by the fees and regulations that has been published actually on an annual basis. Thank you. I hope I've answered that once.
Thank you. I have a follow-up, but I'm going to first allow for other follow-ups. Honorable van der Westhuizen.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, I'm afraid I don't get the point. Save costs for the administration as a whole? Will it in itself increase the income? It's just there's a shorter conduit then for the money to flow to the board. The principle of the board being self-sufficient, that is an old principle. They haven't succeeded in that, and we've looked at the figures. It's not as if the board is that excessively expensive in its workings. But I still fail to understand why the account into which this money is paid.
Chair.
Apologies, Honourable Mitchell, do you have a point of order?
Yes, I've just got another point of order. I just want to, I'm struggling to hear Honourable van der Westhuizen.
No problem, same here. Honourable van der Westhuizen, are you able to maybe move around just to get a little bit better connectivity? Honourable van der Westhuizen.
Chair, I will have to, Chair, I will try to see if I can go onto another network connection.
No problem. Do you want to pose your question? Let's see if we can try and get all of the words in, and then you can try and switch perhaps.
Chair, let me type it in the chat room.
Okay, no problem. I will then ask my follow-up question first while we wait for Honourable van der Westhuizen's question, and then I will read Honourable van der Westhuizen's question in the chat out. Okay. So the question I have, Mr. Phillips, you mentioned obviously that the fees expired, and because the fees previously expired, the board became more reliant on Provincial Treasury to make a direct transfer to them. So I'd just like to understand the fees then in the bill are then essentially more or less, not completely, but more or less than ensuring that the fees are paid again because they expired. I'm not sure if you understand what I'm trying to say. So that's the first part. And then the second part I just want to know is the transfer of the fees usually to Treasury compared to fees to the board. That part sounds essentially just like the changing of a bank account. But what I'm trying to understand is in a bank account, you decide where you want to spend your money. So I would like to understand, would we be changing who would be deciding how to spend the money and where we as a province would be spending the money on by essentially changing the bank account? And then I'll quickly read out the question I've received then in the chat due to connectivity from Honourable van der Westhuizen. He says, I do not understand how the change in the conduit through which the fees will flow will improve the financial position of the board. Surely the options to raise income do not depend on this. Honourable Phillips, I'll then allow you to deal with those questions. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Chairperson. Maybe on this one, I'll probably just hand over to Claire, but just to highlight actually that the budget is appropriated, and in this case, actually, I will actually just give over to Claire. Claire, can you just come in on that one?
Okay, thank you. In answering the first question in terms of how will this assist clause 1 in terms of making the board self-sufficient, it's a bit of an abnormality actually in terms of how it's currently drafted, that the board does not retain those fees. And the intention is just to allow the board to retain those fees in addition to the fees that it collects out of the fees cost. How it will assist is in terms of the transfer that we make to the board in the order of approximately 30 million that we are required to make the board to make it self-sufficient, in other words, to cover its cost of expenditure. And as the committee rightly identified, our board is the most efficient in the country. We are at great pains to ensure that we have effective oversight of control expenditure. So the purpose of allowing clause 1 is simply that the board, instead of paying over those money to the provincial treasury, which we then in essence pay back to the board through the 30-odd million plus transfers back to the board, just simply to allow that the board pays those fees straight off and that they do not have to come into the PR. So it will assist in that sense to the extent of the value of that annual license fee that we pay, approximately 3 million. In terms of how do we have control, or will it have any impact in terms of how the board to spend its money? In terms of the Act, the responsible minister is responsible for approving the budget. So nothing changes in terms of that function. The minister will still be responsible for approving the budget. The minister will still be responsible in terms of how.
Ms. Horton, apologies. I just want to find out, is anyone else able to hear Ms. Horton? Because on my side, she cuts out quite a bit.
I can't hear, Chair.
Okay, Honorable Mitchell, Honorable Nkondlo, Honorable van der Westhuizen, are you able to hear?
I'm here.
Okay. Ms. Horton,
I will try and move a bit. I hope that helps.
Yes, please. Or maybe if you just speak a little bit louder.
Okay.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay. My apologies. I hope it's better now. As I've indicated, the extent to which Clause 1 assists in funding the board's activities relates to the amount that's currently collected by the board and transferred over to the provincial treasury. So the net effect of this is to offset by the approximately 3 million, the 30 million that we are required to pay the board in terms of making sure that the board is self-sufficient. As we've explained in the presentations, and as correctly picked up by the Standing Committee, the Western Cape Gambling Board is an efficient board in comparison to the rest of the country. And that's done in part because of the oversight role that's exercised by the Provincial Treasury. It's also in part in terms of the legislation that we have. And it's obviously also in part in terms of the executive role that's played by the Minister. So nothing in terms of what the board would spend its money, how it would spend its money gets affected by the proposed amendments. Because the Minister would still be required to exercise the same oversight that he has. The board's budget would be constricted in terms of the amount of funding that it receives from the various fees. The various budgetary processes and oversight functions that we exercise with the board would remain the same. So it's just, in terms of Clause 1, it's basically just saying the 3 million that the board collects and then transfers to the PRF, which would Provincial Treasury, in essence, through the PRF receives. All it does is saying, instead of us now having to pay 30 million over to the board, we would now only hypothetically be required to pay 27 million over to the board. So it just offsets the funding shortfall by that amount.
Thank you. That actually does make it much clearer in terms of the aim of the provision. Members, do you have any follow-up questions? If none, Honorable van der Westhuizen.
Yeah, no. If we're going to pay over 27 million instead of 30 million, what is the advantage of this change? I still don't get it. Is it going to unlock new sources of information? Is it going to ensure that the board doesn't allow certain regulations to lapse, as it seems to me what has happened in the last 2-3 years? Will it increase the income of that we receive from gambling as a province? And I don't see that.
If I may answer, okay. The amendments proposed in this bill, the 19th Amendment, have nothing to do with taxes and the rollout of gambling. So in terms of the net effect, in terms of the benefit to the province from a fiscal perspective, there is no change. The intention is to fund the board's activities. The member is quite correct in the sense that, well, what's the 3 million versus the 30 million shortfall? And that's what the remaining clauses aim to address, is the remainder of the shortfall in the funding to the board. The bill has the sole objective of providing funding to the board to enable it to perform its regulatory function, and has nothing to do with enhancing the tax collections or the tax rate or the rollout of gambling for the province.
Thank you. So based on your answers, my understanding is you're changing bank accounts because Provincial Treasury would have paid it over anyway.
That is related to clause 1 only, not the remainder of the clauses.
Yes.
But in essence, yes, it's the same. It's a reversal of the funding that we receive and we pay it back to them. That's correct.
Okay. Okay. Members, can I move on to clause 2? I'm assuming then silence is a yes. Ms. Adams, if we can put clause 2 up then, please. Okay. I'm only going to read is clause 2 the one with the financial calculations in as well? I just want to check. So I don't want to read everything out. I want to then just summarize some of it. If we can just quickly go to the next page. Okay, so it's just the reading of it then. Okay, the following. Apologies, you can go back up to clause 2 because I thought clause 2 had the financial calculations in it as well. Okay, so clause 2 is an insertion in section 44D of the Act of 1996. Following section is inserted in the Principal Act after section 44C, and it reads casino operator fees. 44D, a casino operator fee as set out in paragraph A of Schedule 2 shall be payable to the board by the holder of a casino operator license. Colleagues, I will now take questions on clause 2. If no questions, I just have one question to Mr. Phillips or Ms. Horton. I just want to find out the casino operator fee. Will that be similar to the clause 1, or is it due to new fees? Is it a previous expiration fee that is now being brought back? I just want to have a little bit more clarity regarding the financial impact of clause 2, please.
I think in clause 2, it actually the word casino operator fee is not defined exclusively, and that's the insertion actually of the definition of what a casino operator fee would be.
Ms. Adams, if you could just quickly put clause 2 back up for us then. Okay. Members, are there any other questions regarding clause 2? If none, can we move on to clause 3? Okay, I'm going to read the top part of the clause out, and then I'm going to simply summarize some of what is in the boxes so that I do not need to read it out completely. But members, you do have all the documentation and it's before you on the screen as well. So clause 3 reads the amendment of Schedule 2 to Act 4 of 1996, and then the rest indicates which clauses in previous acts that amendment amended or substituted. 3. Schedule 2 to the Principal Act is amended, A, by the substitution for paragraph 5 of the following paragraph. 5. The limited gambling machine operator fees payable in terms of section 44C are as follows. Then, colleagues, you will see there are 4 boxes left and 4 boxes right. The first section deals with the size of limited gambling machine operators, and then it distinguishes between the numbers, which is those who do not exceed 500 machines per operators, where it exceeds 500 machines per operator but does not exceed 1,000 machines per operator, and where it exceeds 1,000 machines per operator. On the right side, it then indicates what the limited gambling machine operator fee would be. So for example, the brackets with the bold inside, 500,000 that's taken out, and the 1.9 million that is put in. And then, for example, for a period of 10 years is then taken out. In the second box, it's 1 million is taken out, 3.905 million is put in, and for a period of 10 years is taken out. And in the third box, 1.5 million is taken out, 5.858 million is put in, and for a period of 10 years is taken out. And then the clause reads further. But colleagues, if you would indulge me, I would prefer to read the second part of the clause later, as both of the two subsections deal with financial matters. And I'm going to thus then first take hands on clause 3, part A. Honourable van der Westhuizen.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Chair, I have a number of questions on this one. The first one is it best practice to have fees in legislation? My impression is that in the case of some other provinces, the fees charged are taken up into the regulations and not into the main or principal act. So that's my first question, because we also know that money has got a time value, because we know there's something called inflation, and that these fees will actually have to be adjusted far more regularly than to wait for legislation to be passed, because of the far longer term in which legislation, the longer route that it must run. The second one is this rate applicable in respect of debts to the state. I know it's an easy traceable rate because it's published by Treasury on the internet, but this rate is much, much higher, often more than twice the rate of inflation, for example. So my second question is just why this specific rate? How does that relate, for example, to, the turnover or the profits or anything like that of the gambling operators? And then lastly, Chair, if we could just get a breakdown, I presume that obviously the 500,000, the million, the 1.5 million, etc., has also been adjusted for 10 years, and it seems to me as if those 10 years expired some 2-3 years ago. And my question is just how did we come to these figures? Have they been calculated? Because we're working with very strange figures, 1.953. So it kind of, does it suppose that also over the last year or two, that escalation has been taken into account? And then my last question, just Chair, I'm always concerned when a fee is determined by, 500 machines will pay less than 2 million. If you've got 501 machines, you will pay almost 4 million per annum. If you've got 1,001 machines, you will pay 6 million. It creates what I would call financial or fiscal cliffs, where one would limit people or not encourage people rather to go from 500 machines to 501 machines, because that extra machine is going to cost them a considerable additional amount in fees. And I would like to know, what is the rationale for 500 machines, 1,000 machines, and why not a tariff per machine? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you so much. Honourable Nkondlo, I see your hand.
Chair,
Honorable.
thank you, Chair. I'm mainly covered by Honorable van der Westhuizen, and especially on the fees. I think whether also in terms of the the current market values, given the fact that both the department had done some benchmark studies and hopefully beyond international, also domestically, whether when you look at the range and the jumps, of what is being proposed, let alone, I think the point that Honorable raises, as the last point, that when you look in terms of, since the fees are actually according to the number of the machines that one has, I think now the figures, the difference between moving from one category to the next is actually very huge, which will actually discourage indeed and people to move to the next level, especially if, as he was saying, you have one machine, because you would be paying so much fees. And I'm not sure indeed how that, maybe they can give a context to that for us to further understand, the viability of the, and sort of justifiably, if these costs, in terms of industry would be things that could be acceptable. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Any other hands? If not, then I'm quickly going to add my two as well. Honorable Nkondlo and Honorable van der Westhuizen spoke about the breakdown of the fees, for example, the 1.9, the 3 million, and so on. I would just like to add, if you could explain to me just how you got to the figures of it must be less than 500 operators and therefore they pay the first amount. It's between 500 and 1,000 and it's above 1,000. That's for me, that first one. And I just want to find out, we've obviously gone through a period of COVID and lockdown, and casinos were only recently allowed to open. And I just want to understand what happens when a licensee is unable to pay the fees that are being proposed. And if, say, for example, I don't know, I'm Deirdre International, the casino name, and as Deirdre International, I was affected by COVID and I can't pay the fees because I just recently opened up and so on. So I just want to understand if Deirdre International, Deirdre World, or whatever, I'm just trying to make up a name because I'm not trying to be biased towards any stakeholder. What happens if that comes up? Thank you. Before you answer, I just see another hand. Honorable Nkondlo. Okay, it seems there was from previously. No problem. Mr. Phillips, I hand over to you.
Thanks, Chairperson. Maybe just on using the debts as owed to the state. Given where we are talking about the operations of the gambling board to make the gambling board self-sustainable, and in the gambling board, actually, you'll find actually that one of the big cost drivers actually would be their personnel. And we know actually that the personnel actually has been growing beyond CPI. And every year, actually, the Minister of Finance publishes basically the cost of debt owed to the state, basically, which includes a more realistic figure actually with regard to what the increases should be. Then on the LPMs, there are basically only 2 operators in the province. The province has been granted to roll out 3,000 LPM machines. Of the 3 LPM machines, there are 2 operators actually which are linked to both Soho and Sun International that actually rolls out these machines. Each one has been given the right to roll out 1,500 machines across the province. And therefore, basically, the right actually almost to roll out as an operator actually almost, to some extent, actually limits or acts as a barrier. With regard to your question, Chairperson, actually with regard to that, these operators actually would actually almost install 1 to 5 machines at a tavern or a bar or whatever. And based on just the right that they have actually to roll out 1,005, and so it means actually they're sitting with the right to roll out. If they roll out less, no other operator actually outside that too would be able to roll out any LPM machines across the province. So it's actually a right, actually it's almost holding the license to roll out basically only in 2 providers. And therefore, that was the understanding. But coming back to just the issue around putting the fees in the act vis-a-vis the regulation, Claire can come in on that. And I think also maybe the rationale for the cliffs between 500 and 1,500 machines. And then thereafter, I'll just put one slide up in terms of the income actually that derive from these machines. Claire?
Okay, thank you. In terms of the issue of the cliffs, I think Tony has already answered that question, because there is only 3,000 machines that can be rolled out. And it is no, unless we can have another competitor, and you will see the jumps between them are in pro rata to each other. So if we decided that we want to have the 2 at 1,000 or 2 at 1,500, we've got still end up with so it could be 3 operators at 1,000 machines, or it could be 2 operators at up to a maximum of 1,500 machines. So then the idea really is just that the tariffs reflect what we can collect. And as Tony has correctly stated, by owning the 1,500 machine license means in effect you can't let anybody else into the market. So I'm assuming it would be a strategy on the part of those operators to do that calculation as to decide what it is worth for them in terms of whether they want to maintain that there is no competitor in the market by holding that 1,500 license. So that is the thinking of it. I just wanted to, in terms of clause 1, I think the committee must also remember in terms of clause 1, while it is a swapping of the source of funding, it's also a guarantee for the gambling board to receive that funding. Unlike if it's a transfer from the provincial treasury, any transfer is up for grabs in terms of competing needs of other departments. So it does secure a greater sense of independence for the board as well as self-sufficiency if it's not required to bid in terms of funding from, say, a health or education department. So I think it's also important to see it in that context in terms of the independence and also a guarantee of the board's funding. Then the slide that Tony's showing up here, and it's an important question that's been asked by the committee. And I think it's important that the committee understands that, yes, I think you're right in terms of the fees being brought into regulation as opposed to an act. And that was indeed the work that was done by the board and the provincial treasury in 2016. Because prior to that, all the regulatory fees were actually contained in the Act. And you correctly say that it did not allow for the adjustments to be made. The intention as part of our overall review of this Act, which is in process, is to consider bringing the proposed fees that are being recommended now into the regulations. So I agree with the member in terms of that is the standard practice. And that will be, but to affect this amendment, we first had to affect a change in the Act. And also the way this has been written, it does provide for an adjustment, an automatic inflationary adjustment in terms of debts to the state. Then going on to the question in terms of, well, the fees seem to be high. We've just shown you a slide in terms of the LPM operators. And this slide basically shows you for 2016-17, but the situation would be the same now. Basically, it shows you we calculated the gross gambling revenue per LPM machine for all the provinces, including the Western Cape. We just wanted to get a sense of how big is our LPM sector in the Western Cape versus other provinces. And what you will see in this slide is that the GGR generated per machine in the Western Cape stands at 431,415 versus an average for South Africa of 234,468. And you'll see the Western Cape is significantly higher than any other province, indicating that the activity on LPM machines in the Western Cape is far higher than the rest of the country, suggesting that the industry is able to pay additional fees. I hope that answers all the questions.
Thank you, Ms. Horton. Mr. Phillips, do you have anything else to add before I open up for follow-ups?
No, I think my colleague was quite comprehensive, Chairperson.
Okay, no problem. I will now open up for follow-up questions. Honorable van der Westhuizen. Okay,
Yes.
Honorable van der Westhuizen, you can go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, just on the slide that we've just seen, the fact that the per machine income in the Western Cape is already the highest in the country, I fail to see how that shows that in the Western Cape, people can afford to pay much more. If you would say, listen, in our province, we are generating only half the income that they are generating in the Western Cape. Therefore, there's room for us to increase the income. That would make sense to me. But if we're already, it's the highest in the country, it doesn't quite make sense to me. Then secondly, it seems to me, from my limited knowledge, as if in Gauteng, for example, some of these fees are already charged per table or per seat or per machine. If I could just quickly take you to the Government Gazette of March 2013, where, for example, the Gauteng gambling regulations were adjusted. There, every holder of a casino license shall pay a license fee of X plus so much per registered gaming machine, etc. So it just seems to me as if in other provinces, clearly we've seen before that Gauteng seems to be quite successful, as if their way of calculating these fees seem to be one that leads to a much higher turnover, because what we've also seen on Wednesday was that despite the fact that Gauteng has only got, I think, 2.5 times the population of the Western Cape, that they've got about 4 times the gambling income that we're generating. So I'm just wondering whether we shouldn't think afresh. And Chair, that brings me then to the last question, which I could have asked right at the end of this meeting as well. Has there been an impact study done by the Western Cape, or are these just deductions that we are making from the figures and the screens that we've just seen? Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Nkondlo. Just hang on, Ms. Horton. I'm just taking a few more hands. Honorable Nkondlo.
Thank you, Chair. Following from that, accepting, I think, the explanation from Ms. Horton, I think now factoring the current state of the economy, even here in the Western Cape, how do we foresee maintaining, these kind of, supposedly, income levels or income generation type of predictions? Because indeed we are, and I'm sure even the gambling industry at this point, I mean, if we look at the recent economic data, we obviously we need to bring that into question of an industry that has been heavily impacted, with the closure of the industries under lockdown and as we recover. So for me, I think is about that, including, I think the impact study member is asking that also in a recovering economic environment, how do we foresee, these particular sort of values and costings, that we've put together being justifiable, in a true sense? Thanks.
Thank you. I will just add mine as well now. Okay, so I just want to find out, obviously the Western Cape gets 3,000 machines and there's 2 operators. Is it the national department who chooses how many machines the Western Cape gets? Does the national department choose how many operators it gets? I just want to understand who assigns 3,000 machines to the Western Cape, and where do I find that? That's the first part. Because it also brings up the question about competition within the industry, obviously. The second part I would like to find out is, you mentioned, for example, obviously, and I'll make up another name. Say Deirdre has a tavern and it's called Deirdre's Tavern, and I have 5 machines in my tavern. If I'm, for example, Deirdre International, and I own 1,500 operating machines, do I then pay the 5.858 million every year, or do I pay the 1.953 million because in Deirdre's Tavern I only have 5 machines, which is less than 500? So I would just like some clarity on how that calculation will be done, given that you've indicated that both operators have 1,500 machine each, and based on the table in the clause, the last section is obviously for machines exceeding 1,000 machines, which kind of makes me feel that the 2 sections above aren't necessarily as relevant. Thank you. Honorable Nkondlo, I see your hand. Is it from previously, or do you have a new question? Okay.
Apologies, Chair.
No problem. Mr. Phillips, you may take the questions now for answering.
Chairperson, the decision around the number of machines to be rolled out, as well as the number of licenses for casinos, basically is determined nationally. So nationally, this province actually has been given 5 casino licenses to be distributed across the province, and the 3,000 LPMs, basically. So it's national legislation that determines that. Coming back to just the fact, actually, so that actually already sets a differentiated approach across the country, and with the explicit ideal that actually that we would not want to overstimulate gambling, given its impact on society and community as such as well. So I think Claire will tell you about how these things, how they differ across the various provinces, and what the slide was showing you basically was just the income per machine within the province. Now that 1,000, 1,500 and 500, 1,500 and 1.5 is actually the cost of the licenses, basically, not necessarily actually the active licenses. Basically, it is actually the number of machines allocated to that. And I think your point actually you made actually that if it's less than 1,000, actually it actually does, the 2 brackets actually should say something. Claire, can you just come in on this one?
Okay, yes, in terms of the comparison that was made to Gauteng, the Western Cape also has fees and cost regulations, which would be very similar to Gauteng. I won't speak of the quantum of the fees, but we have exactly the same regulations in place, where a license holder is responsible for paying a fee per machine and a fee per table, etc. So we have a similar model to Gauteng. However, Gauteng is fully funded. I think its budget of approximately 190 million to operate that gambling board, in large part because 50% of their revenue comes through a levy that they impose on the gambling taxes. They impose an 8% levy on all gambling taxes collected. And our stance in the Western Cape is we would rather see all gambling taxes being spent on social and economic expenditure for the province, particularly given that problem gambling also needs to be factored into account. Problem gambling needs to be seen as a public health issue. And we feel that any benefits that are derived through gambling taxes need to be spent on the people of the province and not spent on funding a gambling board. So I think one mustn't be mistaken to assume that because the Gauteng Gambling Board is 100% funded, it is actually taking some of the gambling taxes that, as a provincial stance, we actually prefer to be spent on delivering services to the residents of the province. So we do have a similar structure in terms of what is charged per machine, per table, etc. That's already in place, and they get adjusted on an annual basis. The other thing that we also are cautious about is in terms of acknowledging that there are positives and negatives associated with gambling. And so we want to maximize the public benefit that we derive from gambling, and we feel that part of also achieving this is to make the board's funding source not solely connected to the rollout of the number of machines. So in other words, if the gambling board could be incentivized to increase the number of machines because it collects a fee, an investigation fee per machine, that could run the problem also of encouraging the board to roll out excessive number of machines. I just want to pick up on the point in terms of national setting the targets for the gambling devices. As Tony correctly said, the Western Cape has 5 casino licenses. That is determined nationally in terms of the national legislation. In terms of the LPM legislation, there's also a number, that number is also determined by national legislation, but that number is actually 9,000 machines in regulations governing LPMs. The Western Cape Provincial Cabinet took the decision that it was only going to roll out X number of machines, the maximum being 3,000 machines in the Western Cape, in part because when these machines were first talked about the rollout, it was seen as being a potentially more, I don't want to use the word dangerous, but a more problematic form of gambling, and the province wanted to be able to establish what the effect of this form of gambling is on the populace. And hence the decision was taken that the province would roll out 3,000 machines. And indeed, the national legislation also accepts the principle that this form of gambling may be problematic in the sense that for any province who wants to exceed 50% of their permitted rollout, in other words, if the Western Cape wanted to roll out 4,501 machines, it would need to approach the National Gambling Board, and it would have to provide evidence-based research, and there's criteria established in the national legislation in terms of what analysis they have done to justify the rollout and have they looked at the harms that can be caused. If they pass that test, if they want to roll out a next lot of machines, they would similarly have to go through that exercise. So that's in terms of national legislation, having identified perhaps we need to be very cautious with the rollout of this form of gambling. I think the slide that was shown in terms of, I think what that slide is showing is basically how lucrative or how much the machines in the Western Cape sweat vis-a-vis other provinces. In other words, the turnover, the GGR that is generated by one machine is much higher than the rest of the country, which means there must be some benefit to the holder of the LPM, the route operator. The other thing is that the license fees are paid by the route operators, the proposed license fees. They're not paid by, if Claire has a tavern and she's operating 5 machines, that fee would not be paid by Claire, but it would be paid by the 2 route operators that each have the 1,500 machines. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you. I just want to some clarity on the one that you answered of mine. You indicated so it would be paid by the 2 route operators, so be Deirdre World or whatever. But would it be the 6 million, 1,000 machines, or will it be per the fact that Deirdre Tavern has 5?
No, it would be because if I'm V slots or grand slots, the Western Cape Gambling and Racing Board has given me the permission to roll up to 1,500 machines. So it's my decision whether I, as the route operator, whether I roll out that machine or not.
Okay, so I have a license to roll out 1,500, but if I roll out 1,000, then in total, because I've rolled out 1,000, I'll be paying the amount for 1,000 machines, even though it's in various different little taverns across the province.
That is correct. If I may just explain the reason they've done it that way is because these machines, sites can open, sites can close on a weekly basis. And that's why the amount is associated with what they're permitted to roll out. So if they decide they're going to roll out 1,300, or if they're going to roll out 1,500, they fall into that top category because they've been permitted to go up to 1,500. But your shebeen or booking shop does not pay that. It's the route operator that would be responsible for that.
Okay, thank you. Honorable van der Westhuizen.
Thank you, Chair. And perhaps this is not 100% the appropriate place to ask this question, but my question is just in general in South Africa, we want to place quite a high emphasis on competition. And we are a little bit, when it comes to exclusivity and when, only certain people are allowed. And in a sense, I do realize that we are trying to push up the demand, and we're trying to limit the supply so that we can increase the revenue from gambling in that regard for the province as well. But to what extent are these practices supportive of expanding the market and allowing more smaller role players to also become economically active in this sector? Are we encouraging, therefore, a greater competition by the way in which these licenses are issued? And do we perhaps have a danger of this practice being found to be unconstitutional?
Thank you, Honorable van der Westhuizen. Are there any other hands before I allow for that follow-up question to be answered? Okay, if none, Mr. Phillips, you may go ahead.
No, I think it's a complex question which I'll try and as elusively explain. So the gambling industry, which is casinos and the LPMs, are actually run by two groups: Tsogo Sun International, Sun West. The V slots, if I just get it right, actually belongs to Tsogo, or there's some partnership, and the grand slots actually in Sun West, there's some partnership. So when you talk about the LPM industry, basically, then it's actually by only those two players, because if you have 3,000, you can roll out 3,000, and then 1,500, 1,500. So it's actually the two camps actually that you're talking about. So it leaves very little in any environment, basically, to what the member was asking. And so too, you can actually do at the casino level as well, because you have your Grand West, and then you have your Golden Valley Casino, which belongs to Sun International. Then you have your Caledon, and you have your Pinnacle Point in Mossel Bay, and your Mykonos on the west coast that belongs to Tsogo. So your question then would be basically, look, if we're looking at expanding and improving competition, actually what this system actually does, actually where we find ourselves, is that it actually rests actually in only two big players actually on either side of the fence, debating whether it's affordable or not, whether it's affordable for the casinos and whether it's affordable for the LPMs. So it's actually interchangeably. So the inputs that we receive basically is actually from two groups actually saying actually that, look, either the casinos or the LPMs are unaffordable or affordable or should be done differently. So I think that I don't know whether I actually try to, as far as possible and vaguely as possible, explain the current environment. in this regard. Because in the entire country, actually, that's actually almost a similar play.
Thank you, Mr. Phillips. I have one follow-up, and I apologize for coming so late now. So mine is more clarity-seeking question. So we now know that obviously your license could be 1,500, but you can roll out less, and that you pay for the rollout. So now my question is, if I, as Deirdre, roll out 499 machines across the Western Cape, that would mean my total bill will come to 1.953 million rand per annum, an escalating cost. And if I have 500 machines in the Western Cape, I will also pay 1.953 million. So anywhere between one rollout and 500 rollout won't have a difference in how much I pay. And then if I have 501 machines across the Western Cape, I will then pay 3.9 million. But if I have 999 machines across the Western Cape, I will also pay 3.9 million this year. So I just want to make sure that in terms of the practical financial terms, I understand.
Okay. Can Claire, maybe I'll just revert to Claire quickly. Claire, can you just comment on that one? I'll back up on that.
Yeah, that is correct. So if you, underneath the bracket, so if you've got one machine, you would pay, as a route operator, you would pay 1,953 Rand. If you have 1,001 machine, as a route operator, you would pay 5,858, 5,858 million, 5.8 million. That's correct. And as you will see, the jumps. So as was mentioned earlier, there's 3,000 machines in the province that are available. And if you take the jump, you could then theoretically have 6 route operators if you chose to do so, or you could have the combination. In this case, the gambling board has rolled the access to it to the 2 route operators that we have. And that is a decision that is taken by the gambling board to choose how many route operators they have. But the limit of the 3,000 machine is what has been determined in terms of the provincial cabinet that they would like to consider at this stage.
Okay, thank you. But that actually makes me have another question, which brings me back to my original question, because at first I thought I was confused that maybe my original question wasn't asked, but I think the clarity-seeking questions have actually brought me a little bit closer to that original question. So essentially, 1, you have a license for a number of machines. 2, you do not need to roll out all of those machines. 3, you pay for the machines you've rolled out. 4, depending on how many machines you've rolled out, you'll pay based on the bracket in the clause, and that's, for example, up to 500, 5 to 1,000, and then 1 above. So now my original question in the beginning of the meeting then with this particular clause was then, how did you get to the calculation of 500 machines and then 500 to 1,000 and then 1,000 to 500? Is it in total where you said, okay, 3,000 machines equals this amount, so therefore half must be, like, I just want to understand the calculation, like how did you come to say exactly up to 500 machines, whether you've rolled out 1 or you've rolled out 499 or you've rolled out 500, you will then pay 1.953 million this year? Why 500? Why not start the bracket at 250, for example? Apologies, Mr. Phillips.
I think I'll just rely on Claire for that calculation, but I think actually it was in increments of 500 actually that the board actually allocated actually to the operators basically from the onset. Claire?
Yeah, I think it's also in terms of making it manageable for the board. In terms of if you have too many route operators, it can also be with a few machines. The idea is in terms of just making a more manageable process from the board's perspective. So that's why when the original rollout happened of the LPM machines in the province, there was an original rollout of 2,000 machines, and the board took the decision that it would allocate 1,000 each, so that it's viable for the industry as well. It's viable for the route operator. It clearly wouldn't be a viable operation for a route operator just to have, say, 20 machines. And that's why there's certain brackets, and the board at that time took the decision that based on the number of bids that they had received, based on it being a viable, manageable process, both from the board's perspective, but also from the industry perspective, that the decision was taken, hence to roll out the 1,000 machines each. And that's really the logic of why it's done. The other thing that maybe should be borne in mind is in terms of the split that's made between the route operator and the actual site in which that LPM machine is located. So if it's in Claire's Tavern and Claire has 5 machines or even 1 machine, of the turnover and GGR that is generated in that 1 machine that I have, the route operator retains 60% of that, and I, as Claire's Tavern, retains 40% of that GGR. So the route operators are also making a share, although they have to do the investment and maintain the machine and etc. At that particular site.
Okay, I think I do understand much more clear now. Colleagues, are there any other questions on part A of clause 3? Okay, if none, Ms. Adams, if you could put up the second part, then part B of clause 3 for us. Thank you, Ms. Kluter. Okay, we can go back down. Okay, I'll read it out similarly to previously. B, by the addition of the following paragraph after paragraph 5, 5A, the casino operator fees payable in terms of section 44D are as follows. And then there are 3 columns on the left and 3 columns on the right. And the first column has a heading of original value of casino development. And the first bracket is where the original value of the casino development did not exceed 175 million. The second bracket is where the original value of the casino development exceeded 175 million. And then the second part is the casino operator fee. And the first column is 2.805 million per annum, escalating annually at the rate applicable. And then the second part is 7.15 million per annum, escalating annually. Yes. So colleagues, I'm now going to take questions on clause 3, part B. If none, I have a question. Honorable van der Westhuizen, yes.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Chair, again, could I just ask these values, why 175 million apart from historic reasons? And secondly, one would like to know that legislation should also apply not only retrospectively, but also for the future. And I believe that the number of casinos that we have, have been developed a while ago, but 175 million some 20 years ago and 175 million today are completely different prices in terms of the size of the development. So again, my question is, why do you link it to a monetary value and not, for example, to a coverage or floor space value. And can I just ask, will the department please just also respond to the input that we've received, that it seems to me that the revenue or the turnover should rather be used as the basis for determining fees. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Honourable van der Westhuizen. You've covered my question as well. Any other questions? If none, Mr. Phillips.
Chairperson, this one actually deals with the two cliffs, 175 million and well, less than 175 million as well. Having said that, actually it was actually based on the cost of the biggest casino within the province as a starter when it was actually starting to operate. It actually then took into account the original value of the development and what it actually brought about. But then it actually also took out the present value, actually, or the value that 175 million was actually going to be discounted actually into the current present. My colleague Claire will actually come on that, and then I'll probably just back up on that as well. Claire, can you just come on this one, please?
I will answer the question about the turnover, if that's what I'm being asked to respond to. Yes, that is indeed a method. We've chosen that method actually for the 20th and the 21st Amendment in terms of the economic advantage that would accrue as a result of exclusivity. Why we have chosen not to go link it to the turnover, and it's not to say that that is a bad method at all. We're not saying that, but it's in terms of that the board has certain fixed costs that need to be covered. As Mr. Phillips has already indicated, in terms of approximately 72-75% of the board's costs are related to the payment of COE. And by having this kind of method, it creates a greater degree of certainty in terms of the payment of annual license fee, which in terms of would be a requirement to be paid on an annual basis. So that's the reason why we have chosen, as opposed to the GGR route. There's also a matter which I'm not going to delve into, but there's also a matter in the High Court that's under appeal at the moment with regards to the industry having developed new systems in terms of how they calculate their GGR. And the net effect of that is to reduce the tax revenue that is due to accrue to the province. So we're wanting to at least create as much certainty in terms of our funding streams for the board, as opposed to just linking it simply to GGR. And also it covers the cost. The intention of this bill is to cover the cost of the board's operations. It's not intended to link it to the economic value in terms of exclusivity, which we have tried to link to a GGR number.
Thank you, Ms. Wharton. Are there any follow-up questions? If none, I have a follow-up question. So Ms. Wharton, so if I'm Deirdre International and I make so much GGR, I make a specific amount of revenue, and there's this High Court appeal now in terms of how do you calculate it, because you can also write things off against taxes and have less revenue. And for example, my development was just under 175 million. And it seems that based on this particular provision, a submission was made to us to say, listen here, essentially Caledon and Grand West would be paying the same amount of fees. And I just would like to understand in terms of the practical implications, if that is correct, for example. And in the second part, you mentioned that this particular is to obviously to assist in covering the board's cost. So I just want to understand, because previously you mentioned that obviously the portion of the gambling taxes we want to spend on social programs. So I just want to know, the gambling taxes that we receive for social programs, will those be affected by this particular clause? Will we be still able to spend those particular taxes on social programs? And or is this particularly going to then be taken away from social programs? And finally, I just wanted to find out if these fees are intended to cover the cost of the operations of the board. Is the purpose thereof, is not the purpose, but is the symptom more probably thereof, is the board or its operations too big? Or has the board needed to become big in order to fulfill the operations, in order to check licensing? Thank you. Please let me know if you need me to clarify. It's been quite.
Okay, I will try. We did respond to that question with regards to whether Caledon will pay the same as Grand West in the matrix that's been provided to you. And no, it will not be paying the same amount. And I think we've provided the detailed answer in terms of calculating what it would pay and how it relates to what it paid originally. So no, that argument, it's not the case. They would not be classified in terms of Grand West's amount. Is the board too big? I don't think the board is too big. I think what we were able to demonstrate to the committee was in terms of the board being the least expensive board to run vis-a-vis its share of gambling taxes that it's able to collect. Obviously, it's not generating gambling taxes. The industry generates taxes for the province. But in terms of the proportion of taxes that the province is able to collect, the board is the most efficient in the country. The other thing is in terms of any changes in terms of the organizational structure of the board. If the board wants to grow its establishment size, it needs to go through a process. And the process is in terms of it needs to apply to the minister. We then in turn go to the Department of the Premier for organizational development and design to say, is such a post required in terms of the work demands that the board has? And then, if it's proved that there is a need for such a post, then also in terms of determining the salary scale at which that post is remunerated. So the board actually has no control in terms of direct control. Let's put it direct control in terms of the size of the establishment that gets approved, and also in terms of the remuneration scales that get awarded to staff. That's also governed in terms of what is applicable for public servants. And it's in that part, in essence, that's why we've been able to ensure that the Western Cape Gambling Board is relatively efficient in terms of the gambling tax that it collects on behalf of the province. And in essence, the intention is that we do not want to have to use any gambling taxes that we collect to fund the regulation of the industry. And that's in essence what we are having to do at present, because we're having to make a transfer from government to fund the board's activities. And that means that there's less amount of money that we can in essence use for other purposes. And whether that funding comes narrowly from the gambling taxes or if it's part of the provincial equitable share formula, the point is we would like to ensure that we have as much money available, given that there are social harms to gambling. I think one must not treat gambling as if you're opening a Virgin Active gym. It's a different industry. There is restricted access through licenses that get awarded. You may want to open a bookmaker license, but in fact, you can't just go to the board and say, I'm Deirdre Bartman, and I would like to have a bookmaker license. It doesn't work like that. There's only so many that is up and available, and that's at the discretion in terms of how the board decides to adjudicate who gets the license and manages those processes. So I think one needs to appreciate that I understand the member in terms of competitiveness and things like that, but it is a restricted entry throughout the country and indeed throughout the world. That is the model that is followed in terms of access to gambling is restricted and regulated.
Chairperson, just to come in there as well, and I think actually the question initially arose whether we are talking about earmarks for a specific purpose, and the last question actually deals with the social programs. So what we are saying, actually looking at the taxes actually that are derived from gambling actually goes into a provincial revenue fund, where it loses its identity and it's used for much needed social and economic programs within which in education, health, and social development. And given where we are as our country and a province, basically, we are looking at significant reductions, basically, on the fiscal side to fund education, health, and social development. So if one has to make a trade-off between putting a transfer towards regulating the gambling industry vis-a-vis getting young people in school or paying for hospitals, whatever, obviously between that two, actually, there should be at least some winner. And I think the point with this particular bill was actually to offset that choice around whether we build a school or whether we actually make a 30 million transfer towards regulating the gambling industry. So I think that's actually the fundamental reason for putting this down.
Thank you, Mr. Phillips. Are there any other hands regarding 3 Part B? Okay, if none, we can move on to the next clause. I think while it's being put up in the previous meeting that we're in, I was mentioning that sometimes we must just say the apple is green. And I think that sometimes we speak past each other because we don't say the apple is green. We instead try to convolute the sentence. Okay. The next clause is clause 4, the amendment of arrangements of section of Act 4 of 1996, and then it goes further to indicate what it amended previously. Then 4, the arrangement of sections before section 1 of the Principal Act is amended by the insertion before the reference to the heading of section 45 of the following item, 44D, casino operator fees. Colleagues, if I understand correctly, this is simply the insertion of a heading, but Mr. Phillips, please correct me if I'm wrong.
Of a heading as well as a definition around what a casino operator fee will be, Chairperson.
Okay, so this also relates to the previous clause. Colleagues, are there any questions?
Sorry, apologies, Chair.
Yes.
Symbol for the hand, but yes, this just relates to inserting the item in the arrangement of sections. So then you know that this is the heading. It's not a definition. It's just the item in the arrangement of sections.
No problem. Colleagues, are there any questions? Okay, I will go to the next clause. You just put the next clause up. Honourable van der Westhuizen.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, I cannot but help to think that for a piece of legislation that's been around for 22 years, that 19 amendments seems to be quite a high number. And secondly, if I heard correctly earlier today, the 20th and the 21st amendments are also already in the pipeline. And my question is just then, if we know that we actually want other amendments as well to be brought here, and if we take into account that each and every amendment takes a lot of manpower, a lot of money, and therefore detracts from other important work that we as a committee, and surely the officials also should be paying attention to. Why cannot we consolidate some of these amendments? Why can't we, especially with the amendments that are still upcoming, why can't we then at least treat them as one amendment bill? And following on to that, Chair, in a sense, it seems to me one could say yes, legislation needs to change quite often because it's a dynamic world out there. On the other hand, I think one would like to, when considering legislation, one wouldn't like to have to change sometimes up to 3 times a year the applicable legislation. So my question on this is just why so many? Is surely because South Africa is not the first country in the world, and the Western Cape is not the only province in South Africa. Why is it that particularly in this province we really have to have this high number of amendments to a legislation? And shouldn't that again, to reiterate my point from earlier, lead us to consider moving a number of these issues rather to regulations? Thank you.
Thank you, Honourable van der Westhuizen. Before Mr. Phillips answers that question, I'm going to ask that we just move on to clause 5, as the particular question doesn't relate to clause 4 particularly, and then that question can be taken then with other general questions regarding the gambling bill then. Ms. Adams, if you could put clause 5 up then for us, please. Oh, thank you, Ms. Kluter. Clause 5 is the short title and commencement. This act is called the Western Cape 19th Gambling and Racing Amendment Act 2020 and comes into operation on a date determined by the Premier by proclamation in the Provincial Gazette. Colleagues, all legislation have this particular clause in it, but if you have any particular questions regarding this clause, please do put your hands up now. Okay, if no questions, then what I'm going to do now, colleagues, is I'm going to now allow for general questions.
Yeah, sorry, Chair.
Yes, Honourable van der Westhuizen.
Sorry, I thought we were on clause 5 already, and that is why I made those comments, because that is where the high volume of amendments have been indicated. So please, if my question could be addressed under clause 5, because that's where it was directed to.
No problem, Honourable van der Westhuizen. I was just trying to stick to the content of the clauses so that we can deal with general at the end. We are now at general, as there are no questions specifically for clause 5, which is the short title. Honourable van der Westhuizen has already asked his question. Honourable Mitchell, I see your hand.
Chair, I want to continue with where Honourable van der Westhuizen
Mr. Phillips, I'm just going to quickly mute you, and then Honourable Mitchell, if you could just unmute yourself.
Oh, my apologies, Chair. Chair, no, I completely agree with Honourable van der Westhuizen, and I want to, and I suppose I'm being unfair now when I'm asking this, but that we, and with the understanding, and I mean we're all legislators, so we understand that legislation change and new amendments might be brought at a later stage. But could we get an indication that the 20th and the 21st amendments to the bill that is coming will be the last at this stage? Because it's important, and the thing that is very important that Honourable van der Westhuizen has raised is the costing of all these bills, and taking into account the economic situation that the country is currently in. We have an obligation to ensure that we I don't want to call it work smarter, because that's by no indication that it's not being done smartly. I'm just saying that we need to take all these things into account holistically for all legislations and workings of this committee and Parliament in general. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Honourable Mitchell, and I support that question because to deal with a bill, it takes quite amount of time from the committee's time slots. And I'm not complaining that it takes time from the committee's time slots because we are a legislature and our core mandate is legislation. So I do not mind that. However, for every bill, the department has to put out a gazette. There's public participation involved, there's money involved, there's physical, quantifiable amounts of money that is involved with advertising, with going through the bill. And if a consolidated bill was before us with the 19th, 20th, and 21st, I can imagine that we would not be spending that amount of money on a consolidated version compared to 3 pieces of legislation. And it is a concern for me, and I hope that that there's some way, at least in the future, that we can ensure that bills are consolidated instead of bringing piecemeal bills essentially before the committee. I do have another question. Another question specifically relates to many of the submissions asked why is totalizer fees and bookmaker fees not in the bill? And while as a committee we've previously received an answer for that, I don't think necessarily that others understand why in this particular bill the totalizer and bookmaker fees are not included, because it then essentially seems as if only part of the industry is having to pay for fees and the other part of the industry then does not. And I would just like Mr. Phillips and Ms. Horton to indicate to us what specifically, and you don't need to go into the specifics, you can maybe just indicate to us what will the 20th bill be dealing with and what will the 21st bill be dealing with, and will those bills also be dealing with the totalizer and bookmaker fees as well? Thank you. Member Mitchell, is your hand still up from previously?
Yes, Chair, my apologies. I will lower it now.
No problem. Mr. Phillips, I'll allow you to take those questions for now, and then I'm going to open up for another round.
Thanks, Chairperson. I think just on the point is really seriously about actually where this comes up to the 19th. And I think in the previous bills leading up to the 15th amendment, actually you had on an annual basis actually brought the entire bill to the legislature to adjust the fees and the cost structures basically. And that actually also contributed to the amount of amendments actually that we're speaking about. So Claire will touch you on to the 20th and the 21st, and I hopefully that will be the last of its salvos actually within the legislature until we actually get into a process where we are reviewing the entire legislation that deals with the Western Cape Gambling and Racing Act. And then I think Claire can just touch to you also on why we have excluded totes and bookmakers at this stage. But the point is really taken actually that there's a history why we actually brought the 19th in its separate form, given the fact that there was a dissolution of the provincial legislature when the bill was in the system, and it had to be retabled as the 19th in this case. Claire, can you just come in on the 21st, and also maybe just a quickly touch on the process that's going to lead into the review of the entire legislation, and then obviously the last one will be on the totes and the bookmakers that have been included in this calculation.
Okay, thanks, Tony. I think the members are 100% right in terms of the number of amendments that have been affected to date. And a lot of those amendments were affected in terms of the cost and fees related that were taken out of the amendments in 2016. So subsequent, after that, the number of amendments being required to be affected actually has reduced as a result of taking fees into regulations. When what's contained in the 19th, when it was originally conceived of, it was actually matters that are now being dealt with in the 20th and 21st Amendment bill were dealt with as in one bill in the 19th bill. As a result of publishing the 19th bill, there were quite a lot of extensive comments that we received. And the majority of that 19th Amendment bill actually dealt with matters related to casino exclusivity and the relocation of casinos into the Cape Metropole area. And that elicited a significant comment, both from the general public as well as the industry itself. And that necessitated us then to separate what we were trying to achieve. And hence the 20th and the 21st Amendments deal solely with the casino matter in terms of the exclusivity periods having expired and how we address that matter going forward. And that's contained in the 20th bill in terms of providing the process for it, and the 21st Amendment bill, which is a money bill in dealing with the financial matters linked to the casino relocation, in which the Gambling Board is enabled to consider a request to relocate one of the casinos into the Cape Metropole area. And that's the reason why you have two coming that are already on the horizon. With regards to the question why the totalizator has not been included, I think as the committee will remember, when we made the first briefing to the committee, we indicated to the committee that it's not being considered, it's just not being considered at present, because the nature of bookmakers is very different. We also indicated that in terms of there's already a transfer payment that gets paid from the taxes that are collected by the bookmakers to fund the hosting of horse races. So it is a different kind of mechanism that we have to look at in terms of how we would associate adjustments there. The other thing is in terms of the majority of the board's activities are dictated by the LPM and the casino industry, given their size in the province. They by far account for the majority of the regulatory requirements that the board needs to perform. But it's not saying that we have discounted looking at the other gambling operators. We haven't at this stage. I haven't discounted looking at their fees.
Thank you. I will take another round of hands now. Mr. Marstorp, I will allow you first. Mr. Marstorp, if you can just unmute yourself.
Thank you very much, Chair. Chair, the very recent questions and the very recent responses from the department bring me to the very matter which is of interest to me as legal advisor to the provincial legislature when it comes to this bill. And it relates to the very fundamental point which was addressed now. If we accept, as I think for now as an operating premise we do accept, that the industry must regulate itself and that the industry must fund its regulation, then surely an assessment to be made would have to be who are the players in those industry that need to be subject to self-regulation. Firstly. Secondly, we then, if that is the objective of the legislation, namely self-regulation, we then have to have legislation which is sufficiently or appropriately comprehensive to address that objective. In other words, addressing the totality of players in the industry. I have perused the written responses by the department because this was an issue which I raised before. And the written responses by the department come down to that very fact, namely that, and Ms. Horton confirmed this now, that the bookmakers and the totalizator have not been considered, and I'm reading now, at this stage, but have not been ruled out. So I will infer, unless I'm indicated otherwise, that the department appreciates that the bookmakers and totalizators are in fact deserving of being equally charged for being a player in the industry. If that is the proper inference, and I am confident it is the proper inference, that they are legitimate partners in this industry, if that is the inference, then excluding them, one, and excluding them for this reason, namely, not considered at this stage, is with respect not sufficiently convincing or persuasive. And I say this, it is not sound to legislate selectively. The observation was made earlier that we're sitting with umpteenth number of bills from this particular department for this specific industry. I repeat, it is my view that it is not sound to legislate selectively, especially more so if the reason for exclusion is nothing fundamental. It's just that not at this stage. In other words, in due course, they will be included. And if we accept all of that, Chair, then again, the objective of the bill, as it stands now, becomes a question, because it now has an arbitrariness about it by excluding certain players, by selectively legislating for some, as a result of which that some may now conceivably, even potentially, carry a bigger burden of charge than what they would potentially have carried if all potential players were included. And I said earlier in writing, and I'm repeating now, that that differentiation is not sound. It is not objectively rational, and I believe may just expose this bill to some challenge. In fact, having read and perused sufficiently well for my understanding, the submissions made by some of the stakeholders, there's been an indication from them that they will not just let this slide, also because of the arbitrary inclusion of only them in this bill, alternatively, the arbitrary exclusion of others who are, as I said earlier, seen to be part of this sector, as is inferred, but are, for a reason unpersuasive to me, have been excluded. So that is the one fundamental issue that I just needed clarity on, or needed to get on record, so that when the committee does in fact consider the soundness, the goodness of this law, that it will consider equally that it has been advised that there is an arbitrary exclusion for a reason not sufficiently rational of certain players, regardless of their size. Ms. Horton also indicated now that a substantial amount of fees come from these two players, the route operators or the casino operators, etc. Hence, they are justifiably only included. That is not sound. That's not law. That's not the law. The law wants non-arbitrary, non-discriminatory, objectively sound law for everyone who is to be subjected to the purpose of what that law is aiming to be. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Marsdorp. In fact, it's because of your comments that I raised the question. Colleagues, when you look at the input and the submission document that you have on your email, you can see on column 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, Column 6, it's comment legal advisor WCPP. It's in between the comments, obviously, that we've received written as well as department's comments. So if you wish to read those, that is the columns in which you would see it. I see another hand, Ms. Miller.
Chair, just to respond to that point from Advocate Marsdorf, one thing that I just wanted to clarify was that legislation can indeed differentiate between categories of persons, and provided there is actually a rational basis for this. It's not necessary for totes or bookmakers to be included, but as long as the provincial department can explain how the differentiation links to the purpose, it would actually be rational. But yes, so I would hand over to my colleagues at the department to just provide that specific link in this regard.
No problem. Thank you, Ms. Miller. Is your colleague online, or will it be Mr. Phillips and his colleagues?
I'm proposing that Mr. Phillips or Ms. Horton explain how it actually links to the purpose that they are trying to achieve.
Okay.
No problem. Thank you so much.
Can I hand over to Claire and then I can come in, Claire? Can you just move on that one?
Okay, thank you. I think what was misunderstood was the point that I was making was that these two segments of the gambling sector, the LGM or LPM operator and the casino operator, comprise of the majority of the work of the gambling. Given their size, they in terms of the number of machines that need to be monitored, the oversight role, the audits that need to be conducted, those two subsectors of the gambling market comprise the majority of the board's work, and hence the need for them to pay their proportional share of the board's operating costs.
Thank you, Ms. Horton. Mr. Phillips, do you have anything that you would like to add?
Look, I think I'm sufficiently covered actually with regard to the size and the fact actually that we're saying, look, this fee actually contributes to the operations and sustainability of the board. It's not actually the only fees actually that's being collected. And in this case, actually, we've taken an approach actually based on the workload, the size, as well as actually the effort actually made actually at this point in time. And as Claire's mentioned, actually, that that we did not exclude into the future basically how we're going to go about actually getting the bookmakers and the totalizators actually to contribute towards the regulation part of things. In addition to having currently been receiving somehow a rebate basically at this point in time.
Could I maybe also just add, if that's permissible?
Yes, you may.
Then also in terms of the activities of the board's also responsible for doing promotion of responsible gambling, it's gambling awareness, research into the gambling sector, and most of those activities are in fact centered around the casinos and the LPM component of the gambling industry.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to take another round of questions. Colleagues, are there any questions? Mr. Marsdorf, I saw your hand.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, I agree with Ms. Phillip. No, Ms. Horton, sorry. I agree with Ms. Horton that players currently included in this bill comprise the vast majority of contributors. And proportionately, they are then responsible for the vast majority of the payments. I agree with that sentiment of proportionality. But that in and of itself is not sufficiently justifying to exclude the other players. In fact, it serves as a sound basis to very much include the other players so that they equally, proportionately can contribute to their regulation, as is the stated, supposedly, purpose of the bill. I am saying that if there are big players, let them pay big. If there are small players, let them pay small. What we have now is we have a number of players and some are expected to pay big. That's the point I am making. It is akin, and this may be a facetious example, it's akin to the following. If there's a soccer field in a community owned by a particular organization, and the surrounding soccer teams must pay a fee to play on that soccer field. Imagine there's a rule that says that only soccer players with black hair must pay an X fee, and those with blonde hair must not pay. That would be an arbitrary discrimination by excluding the one group from the other. Equally, in this instance, there's a playing field. I'm not saying that the casinos mustn't pay. I'm saying, in fact, if they pay as much as they do, it is because of their size and their footprint. But we cannot soundly, legitimately, rationally exclude the small player simply because they're small. And the inference, like I said earlier, is that we deem them to be part, but not at this stage. That's the sentiment that was expressed by the department. I'm saying make them part already and let them pay proportionately. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Okay, we've received 2 arguments legally regarding whether all players at this current time should be included in the bill, or if some players can be included at the moment and other players included at a later stage. And I would like to propose a way forward. Given that we're obviously not making any position in terms of our views today as a committee. My proposal is that I just want to find out, Mr. Maasdorp, the comments that you've provided, is that in a legal opinion and that was just simply summarized in the written comments, or does that not constitute legal opinion from your side?
Chair, it was a summary for purposes of the matrix, but the essence of the opinion is encapsulated in what I have submitted.
Okay, so what I would like to then request is, Mr. Maasdorp, as you are the Provincial Parliament Legal Advisor, if you could then provide us with a legal opinion, as well as, I think it's Miss Miller, who's with the Premier's Department with Legal. Am I correct?
That's correct,
Is it Miss Miller? Okay. Miss Miller, since legal falls under the Premier's Department, could we then request a legal opinion then regarding this particular matter then from the department? And the reason I asked then for one also from the WCPP is for us then to be able to then compare the input from the 2 legal opinions as a committee.
That would be in order, Chair.
Okay, thank you so much. Mr. Maasdorp, are you in order with that?
Yes, Chair, thank you very much.
Okay. What is sufficient amount of time for a legal opinion to reach the committee on this particular matter? How much time do you require?
Chair, could I maybe inquire when the next committee meeting would be? I would want to commit to a time, but I'm also very much mindful that I am occupied in similar committee meetings next week with similar requests for legal opinions, etc. and I would not want to necessarily dilute my attention to those committees in view of this later edition. Could I maybe then inquire so that I can submit the opinion maybe 24 or 48 hours before the next meeting, if I could just get a sense of when the next meeting may be?
No problem. At the moment, we tentatively on the program have the 7th of October for the informal deliberations. Okay. However, I have not scheduled anything in the slot of the 21st of October for this committee, as I was concerned that perhaps we might need more time. What we could do as a committee is on the 7th of October, we could consider, not consider, but we could deliberate on the inputs received on the legal opinion, and then we could move the informal / formal possible consideration to the 21st of October, which would mean that if it was on the 7th of October, then ideally, because I do not like getting documents the day before, ideally, I would like to see something in our inbox then on the 1st of October, which would be more or less than a week before that committee. Mr. Marsthorpe, Ms. Miller, would the 1st of October be sufficient time?
From my side, Chair, that should be sufficient. Thank you.
Okay, Ms. Miller.
Yes, it's sufficient for me as well, Chair.
Okay, no problem. And now I just would like to ask the committee members whether it would be in order for us to get a legal opinion both from the Premier's Department as well as the Western Cape Provincial Provincial Parliament by the 1st of October on whether it is good law, essentially, to only have parts of the industry regulated in this bill and not all, whether all should be in the bill or whether it is fine for it to be part. To second, whether it be satisfactory for the committee members for us then to deliberate on that input on the 7th of October, and then essentially for us then to move that committee meeting to the 21st of October, the possible formal and informal and formal consideration of the bill. Would committee members be in order with those proposals? And can we resolve that? Honourable Mkontlo, Honourable Mitchell, Honourable van der Westhuizen, are you still with us?
In agreement. Thank you, Chair.
No problem. Thank you, Honourable Mitchell.
Supported, Chair.
Thank you, Honourable Mkontlo. Honourable van der Westhuizen, are you with us? I would like it to be unanimous if possible. Okay, I think
Agreed.
Honourable,
Agreed.
there we are. Thank you. I thought perhaps you might have had another connectivity problems. Okay, colleagues, the committee has now resolved that on the 1st of October will be the deadline that the Department of the Premier and the Western Cape Provincial Parliament will submit a legal opinion on this matter to us, that we will then deliberate on the legal opinion on the 7th of October, which will be our next meeting essentially, and that we will then move the possible informal and formal consideration, which would have been on the 7th, to the 21st of October, so that members of this committee can have sufficient time in order to familiarize themselves and to be able to put together what their view would be on these matters. Colleagues, are there any other questions regarding the legislation? If not, Honourable van der Westhuizen.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, in considering legislation, I'm always concerned what the impact may be. And I've seen too many pieces of well-intended legislation having exactly the opposite effect or damaging effects. And I'm just wondering, to what extent have studies been done, or to what extent can we ask the department to present to us the financial situation regarding the industry, So that is the first thing that I would like to know. I wouldn't like to be the one that passes or promotes legislation that eventually will be harmful to an industry in a time when we really need to rebuild the economy. And the second question, Chair, is, could we perhaps get a table or a summary of the fees that have been collected and the increases over the last number of years? And one of the reasons why I'm asking this, it seems to me as if in the matrix, the department's response said that, you know, the last time that the Caledon Casino had to pay their, and my apologies if I don't use the correct terminology, the casino fee that was 2017, I think, and that seems then to me as if somewhere there's been a lapse, and I don't know if that is due to the 10-year determination that was contained in the previous version of the legislation, but perhaps if we could just get those figures, and particularly why is it then that it seems now to me as if Caledon will now have a lapse or have experienced a lapse of some 3 years in which it didn't pay its fees, and obviously that will now be then reintroduced to them, it seems. But if we could just get the background to that, I'll appreciate that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Honourable van der Westhuizen. Honourable Marcel, is it a new hand? Thank you. Okay, it's an old hand, it seems. And then I just have a question. No problem. I just have one question that I would like to add. The board requested the committee to consider an extra or additional or an amendment to the bill addition, requesting, I read from their presentation, that the quorum for a meeting of the board shall be a majority of the members appointed from time to time. And I would just like to find out what the department's view is on that, given that the current quorum is 5 members on the board. And would that be an improvement? Is there any best practice? Is it a better form for quorum for a board such as this? Perhaps if you have any indications regarding that. Thank you.
Chairperson, just thanks for that. I think surely the information on the industry and the financial stuff actually that we can provide to the members. We can also make a table in terms of actually what was the fees increases over the past, say, 5 years. And the members correct actually. Maybe we should not confuse the exclusivity with what we are asking here, but one of the reasons why you see in that lapse there was a 10 years actually where casinos actually got exclusivity to operate in a specific geographic space. So for example, the Grand West is Sun International. It actually operates within the Cape Metropole. And because of the licensing conditions actually and the exclusivity that has been no other casino can actually just relocate to the metro and decide tomorrow I'm going to open up a casino because I have a license here. So after 10 years, those lapsed actually, and that is one of the reasons why there seems to be a self-sustainability of the board challenge, because the exclusivity that was about to be paid hasn't been paid actually since 2010 up to given where they are now in 2017 with the Caledon Casino as mentioned. So we can provide that. Chairperson, I think the last time we were at the legislature, we came to present candidates that we've shortlisted for the board. And what the legislature in its wisdom done, it actually nominated 3 people, or at least groups of 3, that will fill vacancies of the board up to May next year. So it means from now until May next year, the board should not have an issue with regard to being co-rate, because given the long process actually of either advertising, getting nominees, getting the probaties done, having the interviews, and then making a recommendation. So where we are sitting, actually, we see the board as correct and actually accommodates currently the issue of not having a full board. That would be correct actually at this point in time. So I think that request might have been actually prior to the decision of the legislature actually to nominate those candidates actually at various intervals actually to be. However, we are still in the process actually of reconceptualizing and putting up at the legislation. And Claire said that process is underway. That's surely something that we can take into consideration in the new part of the legislation going forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Just to correct, it was actually in the previous round of board appointments that we actually recommended 4 per vacancy, and in the current round we actually recommended 5 per vacancy, if I'm correct there, and we only needed to recommend 3 per vacancy for each in terms of the legislation. And then there's just one last matter in the submissions that I saw, and this relates more to public participation and the process of bills. And that question, I think, is a little bit of a split between the department, the provincial parliament, and the committee. And part of it I'll deal with it, and other part I'm going to ask that the department and or our legal advisor perhaps assist us. So when the election of 2019 indicated these will be the representatives of the next parliament, essentially what happens in the Western Cape Provincial Parliament in terms of our rules is everything before lapses. So it doesn't matter where it was, it automatically, it's like close the book. And the bill, in terms of this particular bill, for example, in order for the provincial parliament to then consider it, had to be brought and referred again. And I think some of these submissions speak to why was the bill not completed? Why did the provincial parliament ask again for new input? And that is in terms of our rules, when something lapses, it has to be brought again. So then essentially we wait for the department, we wait for the provincial parliament, and then once the bill is referred to us as a committee, then only legally are we allowed to start dealing with a particular bill. Mr. Phillips or Mr. Marstorp, is there anything else you would like to add in terms of this particular process, given that there was some questions in the submissions regarding this?
Okay. Chairperson, it predates me joining the Treasury. So I'll hand over to Ms. Horton just to tell you in terms of what actually was the issue, and then obviously why it had to be reintroduced from our side. Okay.
Tony, if you don't mind, could Dr. Ndandana answer that question? Thank you.
Sure, thank you, Doc.
The bill, as the chairperson, Honorable Batman, indicates, the bill was introduced, if I'm not mistaken, it's on the 2nd of May 2019. And then about 4 days later, the provincial parliament was dissolved. So the bill, therefore, the previous version of the bill lapsed.
Thank you, Doctor. Mr. Mastrop, is there anything you would like to add?
Nothing new to add, Chair, except to confirm that that is indeed the situation, that we stopped to be seized with whatever business we were confronted with at the time, and because the committee ceased to exist and its business, therefore, ceased to exist. So you captured it quite succinctly. Thank you.
No problem. Thank you so much then. Colleagues, are there any other questions Going once? Going twice? Okay.
Chair, you are
Yes,
muted.
Oh,
We can hear you.
am I muted?
I can hear
Am I
you,
muted
Chair.
now?
Now I can hear you. My apologies. I think it was my side, not your side. My apologies, Chair.
No problem. It's okay. I was watching a very funny video this morning about if we were around a table, how a Zoom meeting would play out in real life. But members, are there any other questions that you may have?
No, thank you, Chair.
Okay. Colleagues, if there are no other questions, I will then now say thank you to the officials from the various departments who have joined us today. Thank you so much for engaging us and for answering all of our questions. We know it's a very technical bill, especially when it comes to finances. And we know that there have been quite strong comments regarding the bill. So we really do appreciate the patience you also have with us as committee members asking our questions, sometimes us asking it more than once. But please note it simply so that we can truly understand the impact this bill would have on the people of the Western Cape, and to also ensure that there is robust public participation on this particular bill. But thank you so much for being here. We will now excuse you, and the members of the committee will go on with its committee business. Thank you so much. Okay. Colleagues, we will now be continuing with committee business. Okay. Colleagues, are there any specific resolutions other than the ones already taken that you would like to table in terms of this topic before I move on to our upcoming meetings? Okay, if no extra resolutions. Honourable van der Westhuizen.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Chair, quite frankly, I did get a response, but I'm still not understanding the rationale, for example, for some of these, what I would call cliffs in terms of numbers, the 175 million rand, because surely there should be a possibility of future casinos as the Western Province grow in numbers and the economy is growing, etc. And I was wondering whether some of these questions could be put in writing, because I think many of them have got historic reasons, but they should be rational. And as the advocate Maastop has indicated, legislation should be rational. Otherwise, it's open for challenges. And I am concerned that should this be challenged, that some of these amounts won't be found to be rational. Also, for example, the annual increase is not linked to what I believe is a rational rate. So can we perhaps just ask the department to give us a little bit more about the history or the background of some of this and why they believe this to be irrational? Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Honourable van der Westhuizen. How about we phrase it as whether the department can please provide the calculation and reasoning behind the amounts proposed in clauses. I think it was clause 3. Would that be satisfactory? Would you like to amend?
Yes, thank you, Chair. There was also an undertaking from the department, and probably it would be best if we could take that up into our resolutions, that, so we request them to provide us with the historic figures in terms of the income, in terms of the various categories of fees levied. They promised for the last 5 years. Would we be able to say for the last 10 years? And then also, yeah, so that was an undertaking that they forgiven, but I think if we could, tighten this up by making it part of our resolutions, and then I don't know if they have access to the turnover of the entities, but if we want to introduce in the future a gross gambling revenue levy, then the turnover could not be, a private matter. Then it will be a matter of public information. And if that's available and already public information, if they would be so kind to also put that together for us in order for us to be able to just determine whether the increase in the fees and the increase in the potential revenue of the various operators are in line with one another. Thank you.
Okay, no problem. Members, are you happy with that, or would you like an amendment? Honorable Nkondlo, I see your hand.
Thank you, Chair. I'm happy with that, Chair. I just wanted to add. I think Member van der Westhuizen spoke about. I'm not sure whether in industry performance or something, but I think also in light of the fact that one, the fees, the proposed fees, one are sort of put up against the presumption of the provincial sort of industry earnings, and I think as Ms. Horton was explaining, that when you do the contrast between our province and the other provinces like Gauteng, it is justifiable, in the context of the Western Cape. And I'm sure that has to do with the historic, GDP and industry performance in the Western Cape. But then you can't then take away the reality of the current impact, both of the economy and COVID-19 in this economy of the Western Cape, including of the gambling industry. And for me, I think what member was asking, what Member van der Westhuizen was asking regarding, that kind of an industry performance becomes important in order for us, if indeed we have to approve a legislation that includes, such issues that relates to prescription or prescribed fees in it, that actually we are justifiable, especially in the kind of economic environment we're talking about, because we can't ignore that there is a particular economic environment that we're talking about globally and also in the province, in as far as, what industries, are capable of post versus what they were before, and going forward. So for me, I think that becomes very important, because whilst I heard the explanation of the department, I'm still not convinced that I think they are appreciating, in this current environment, they're appreciating, the big impact that has recently just happened, given the fact that this process of this bill has been happening prior to the COVID-19 sort of a pandemic. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Honorable Nkondlo. So Honorable Nkondlo essentially supports then the two resolutions from Honorable van der Westhuizen. Yes. Are there any other resolutions regarding this particular topic that has not been taken yet? Okay, if none, I'm going to then move on to other committee business. I'm just going to mute quickly while I cough. Apologies for that, members. Okay, Ms. Adams, could you please put up the draft program for the oversight? The first oversight is the 15th of October. So that would be the week after the 7th meeting that we have. Is it the 15th of October, the oversight to Ankerlig? Ms. Adams, if you could just put that up for us, or Ms. Kluter even.
Paige, my Word documents just froze now. We don't have a particular program. I'm trying to open the parliamentary program
No
for the
problem.
15th of October, but it's just frozen right now. But it is the 15th for Uncliffe.
No problem. Okay, colleagues. Okay, so that one's not draft at the moment. That one is more or less set in stone. The other one that's draft is the oversight visit week. So, colleagues, in terms of the previous resolutions that we have taken as a committee, we've tried to identify dates in order to action these resolutions. So, for example, you would know that previously we've resolved to go and visit Ankerlig. We've also previously resolved to go to the Atlantis SEZ in order to see briefings and updates, because, for example, the Atlantis SEZ is also based on an act of the provincial parliament. If you could go a little bit down, I think that is the end of the writing there. Yes, that's the end of the writing. And hopefully we'll also be able to then engage with some of the renewable energy companies or manufacturers in that area as well. Then we have another oversight week, which was a little bit more difficult to obtain for us, but I do thank the members for indicating that they will be able to attend, agrees to have the oversight week in this particular week. And I also thank programming for allowing us to go on oversight during this particular week. Ms. Adams, do you perhaps have the Word document open for this particular week? If we can put that one up, perhaps, please. Okay, colleagues. So let's quickly go to the first page. Oh, sorry. Let's go to the next page. But the first page of the start of the program. There we go. Okay, so colleagues, you will notice that the briefings are based on previous resolutions that we've taken in terms of energy matters. However, I've taken the liberty to put briefing requests in for both the Mossel Bay municipality as well as the George municipality in terms of the economy and tourism, as well as renewables and their views, for the simple reason that it is my view that you cannot go to Mossel Bay as a municipality and George as a municipality, and we do this whole big oversight week, but we don't actually engage with the municipality themselves. And that is the reason I've taken the liberty to include such a briefing. And the proposal is that we go obviously to Mossel Bay first, and then we go to George. That would mean that we will travel from Cape Town early in the morning. And colleagues, the reason for traveling via, okay, just stop there quickly with the page before we go too quick. The reason for proposing traveling by car is that when you calculate the amount of time it would take going to the airport, waiting for the flight, checking in, getting on the flight, getting the car to go to the respective briefings, it essentially would be the same amount of time if we had to fly with so many people. And then thus the proposal is that we obviously drive. So we would then leave early morning on the Monday, arrive in Mossel Bay, and then have lunch in the area somewhere, and then at 1:30 we would then start with our first briefing. We would hit the ground running, as you can say, with the Mossel Bay local municipality briefing. The second is then to have an engagement with the business chamber of the area. You can go a little bit down because it's just the little bar on the screen is blocking the wording a little bit. If we can just go a little bit down to the Mossel Bay Business Chamber briefing. Ms. Adams, there we go. Then we have a business chamber engagement. So when we engage with business chambers, it's more an engagement than it is a briefing, given that they are in the private sector. And then afterwards, checking into the hotel. The next day, if we can go to that then, we would start nice and early, and we would depart for the Gerikwa Eskom power plant. This is also part of a previous resolution. Perhaps in the activity document, we can just put the word Eskom before Gerikwa power plant, as it belongs to them. And this is essentially us taking up their previous invite. And we would then have a briefing. After that, we would then depart to Petro SA. And it was also part of a previous resolution, especially regarding the diesel reserves. And given that the diesel reserves is also connected to the contractual obligations to Eskom, that has been included specifically as well. Local employment statistics is to understand their footprint within the area. And colleagues, if you've noticed, I've tried to keep it as to one briefing per session, because I'm concerned that with oversight visits, that sometimes if we put too much into a slot, that we won't necessarily have enough time to ask questions. Let's go to the next page. The next engagement would be from Total. I think I failed to mention previously that Gas and Petro SA's briefing and information would be together. So the next briefing the next day would then be Total, and that will specifically be regarding the Brilpada project. And that, as you notice, will, since they're in the private sector, will essentially be an engagement. And hopefully we can understand more what's occurring in the Brilpada area, project area. And then next after that is also part of a previous resolution that we took in Saldanha Bay oversight visit, which was to invite the Department of Mineral Resources, DTIC, the new name DTIC, and the Provincial Department to engage us, to brief us on the regulatory processes for the oil and gas industry and any gaps therein. After that, we would then travel to George. Let's go to the next day. And again, nice and early, we would start with the George local municipality, the George municipality, for the similar reasons to engage the municipality that we are in the first session. And Ms. Adams, if you could just move a little bit down because my MS Team bar is preventing me from reading the bottom. We would then engage with the George Business Chamber. If we can go down then to the next page, we will then go to the hotel the evening. And then the next day, we would depart for the airport where we would be briefed by AXA as well as the Provincial Department on the airport tourism and business travel statistics, its solar photovoltaic plant, and impact of COVID-19 regulations. If you remember, colleagues, recently in the recent budget, we also gave George Airport some money for COVID-19. And after that, I've taken the liberty to request an engagement with George Biomass to Energy project regarding the energy they are providing to the grid. And the reason for this is that the Provincial Department sent us which bid window companies are in the Western Cape. And in terms of the companies providing energy to the grid, this is the only company in that area that we are visiting that is providing energy to the national grid in terms of one of the bid windows. And I thought that it would be productive for the committee to actually engage one of the companies at least that is providing energy in order for us to understand the processes and exactly how much energy is provided. And then that essentially would be the end of the oversight visit. And I would like to request if everyone is happy with it. Firstly, Honourable van der Westhuizen.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much for a wonderfully program that have been put together. Can I just ask, on the Tuesday when we are visiting Gas, I would be very much interested, or I am interested in the future, obviously, of the Moss gas plant, as it is reported that the known gas reserves will run out by the end of this calendar year. And, you know, this being in November, it could very well be that Moss gas is very close to you know, on it, or being on its last legs, so to say. So if we could just add on the agenda, or to the agenda, that when we visit Moss gas, that we're also being informed of the various options, you know, the for the future of the plant, perhaps putting the plant to alternate use, and, you know, what would be the capital injection that would be needed for various scenarios for the Moss gas plant. Thank you.
I'm happy with that. The intention was to do Moss gas and Petro SA at the same time, so I'm happy with that. Honorable Nkondlo.
Thank you, thank you, Chair, and thank you for the program. I wanted to check, especially with the Mossel Bay visit, what is the possibility also of including engagement with the public stakeholders? And I take that in the George, you've included the business community there, which is impacted, and I'm sure even in Mossel Bay, because I mean, the future, you know, of Moss gas has got a huge impact, both in terms of jobs, which I see that there is a presentation, you know, to look at the employment issues there, but also on the businesses in the area. So I just wanted to check whether is it possible to also include, you know, some of the public through, especially the business community and other related stakeholders that would like to engage on this particular situation. Thanks.
Thank you, Honorable Nkondlo. So what I try to do with the program is I try to give each municipality a session for us to brief us on, and I've attempted to find a slot for both the Mossel Bay Business Chamber as well as the George Business Chamber to brief us on, and to indicate to us, listen here, this is how COVID has impacted us, or as well as this is the ease of doing business within the municipality or province or national. In terms of public participation, and this is where we're going to need to speak about logistics. Colleagues, we are still restricted to the disaster management regulations, which indicate that we're never allowed to be more than 50. So and I was going to speak about this in terms of logistics, is that my request is that if there's someone from the public who wishes to attend our sessions, because we must also remember some of our sessions are going to either be with private companies or with institutions such as Eskom, where you need to provide your ID because you need security clearance, or I don't know, if all the extra things. So because of all those barriers as well, I would like to find out if we can allow the procedural officer that if anyone from the public would like to join our sessions, that through Ms. Adams, that it is ensured that we are never more than 50 people. So I don't mind someone from the public wanting to be at our briefings. I would, however, as chair, I need to ensure that we don't ourselves as legislatures contravene the law. And I would just like to then ask if she can then make sure that we are never more than 50, but I am more than happy with someone from the public wanting to attend our sessions. If they could then contact Ms. Adams and give their name and surname, contact details, as well as ID in, so that we can then also provide those to any of the sessions that, for example, if they want to come with us to Total. Total, for example, is a private company, and we would be subjected to some of their own company rules as well. And for example, Eskom needs ID. For example, previously when I went to go visit Ankerlig, Eskom needed my ID and full details example. So that would be my request then. Honorable Nkondlo, would that satisfy your request?
Yes, Chairperson, thank you very much.
No problem. Colleagues, just for information also, I've requested that where the provincial department is also part of, and I've asked that as far as possible that there be someone from the province at all of our sessions, that they never send more than 1 or 2 officials as far as possible, for the simple reason that we are trying to keep the participants to the absolute minimum so that we do not contravene the law. Colleagues, if there is nothing else regarding the program, I would like to request that when the procedural officer contacts you, that you please indicate to her in terms of logistics, whether you'll, for example, be driving with your own car or if you'll be using the WCPP transport. I, for example, will be using the WCPP transport, but the procedural officer will need to know final figures in order to make sure that enough is arranged in terms of social distancing as well, in terms of PPE, and that you please do get back to her before her own deadline, which she will indicate to us, just so that we can make sure that everything is organized beforehand. I've also asked her that beforehand, if she could just print pages for us. It's not for us, it's more for herself and logistics, to make sure that the symptoms that you're not allowed to have, that those are ticked off beforehand in terms of entry into spaces and venues and things like that. Okay. Are there any questions? If none, colleagues, thank you then so much for today, and thank you for putting up with me from 1 o'clock until 4 o'clock on a Friday afternoon. I always love to say ons werk hier, we work here, and I wish you a safe and a warm weekend. Thank you so much. With that, the committee is adjourned.